the Bruins have played the Panthers in the playoffs the last 2 seasons. Last year, they went 7 games. This year, where Florida was certainly better and the Bruins weren't as good as they were last year, that series went 6. It was pretty competitive. So, like, by that alone, if you want to just use the Stanley Cup champion as a benchmark, you're not that far off.
Sure.
This is a huge offseason for the Bruins. They have, $24 million in cap space. We just saw the Ullmark trade, Linus Ullmark going to Ottawa. I am super, super interested in see more so what they're going to do starting Monday with free agency and the start of the new year, as opposed to the draft. The draft is whatever. They might not even have this pick by the time this gets out there. But I guess we can start with the Florida thing. I think that's certainly the better blueprint if you're looking at the 2 teams that made it to the Cup final. I do think there are some things that are replicable,
Sure.
but I was reading Florida Hockey Now. George Richards said he ran through like every move that they made to get here, and he said he literally wrote every move seemed to work. It's
incredible.
Yeah,
and like they in a lot of spots too, like they swung for the fences. Like they weren't.
Yes.
These weren't necessarily moves where they were working in the margins. Like, it takes a lot to go out and be like, we're just going to go ahead and change. We're going to go ahead and trade Jonathan Huberdeau after like the season he had.
Mackenzie Weegar is was a guy they valued at the time.
It's just like every single move works. So I guess in that sense, what message does that send? Like, be bold?
Yeah. So not even that too.
Like, go nuts.
And I was looking. I didn't remember this or didn't know it at the time. Whatever. Like Tkachuk obviously wanted out of Calgary, and he basically was like, I'm only going to 3 teams, and it was Florida, Carolina, and St. Louis. So like I guess that tilts the scales in your favor, but I don't know, like that also means, excuse me, it's not as you've really got to step up the ante to beat out one of these other 2 teams. Like it could have just as easily been St. Louis or Carolina. So like, and I think that's the one thing is you have to be bold. Or no, you don't necessarily have to be bold. It's just one way to go. I don't think the direction that the Bruins are going is wrong. I wouldn't say it's super bold, but maybe they, I guess if you're looking for a detour, that would be it.
I think the biggest thing for the Bruins is like they're kind of trying to find a new identity, right? Like, and
but they're still kind of in the midst of the old one at the same time.
Well, that's what I mean.
But that's understandable.
But I think that in order for them to take the next step, there's got to be some sort of shift in that regard. Because I feel like Florida definitely has an identity. Like I feel like Florida, they remind me a little bit of the Bruins from like a few years ago, where they can because they can beat you in so many different ways.
Well, I also think Maurice and Cassidy are similar, where it's like if you don't win in that window, you look out below because it's a demanding style. And they bought into it. They talked about that too afterwards. Like, this is not easy to play, but these guys all bought into it.
And I think that you saw that really on display in the Bruins series against them, where it was like it felt like they were constantly playing catch up. Mm-hmm. Like either from like an offensive firepower standpoint. Like that's the other thing. Like when I watch Florida, I'm like, they've got just the sheer number of guys who can put the puck in the net on the big stage. Like they got some guys who come playoff time, you're like, all right, they're gonna score. Whereas with the Bruins, pretty top heavy in that regard, and then you have some of the disappearing acts that you've had these past couple of years. So in terms of like what lessons can the Bruins take from the Panthers, like I mean you need to bolster that offense. Like they've got to get more offensive depth.
So here's one thing I wonder is like, is it a roster building thing where are you built to win 50 to 55 games and get in the playoffs and see what you can do from there? Or are you built to win games in the playoffs and maybe that doesn't manifest itself as much in like January.
Well, that's kind of what makes the Linus Ullmark trade that much more fascinating, right? Like with those 2 goaltenders, it's the former.
Sure.
Where it's like, yeah, we're putting a premium on the regular season. Like we need these 2 guys to get there.
Yep.
Now, and it's sort of a matter of circumstance, like they had to trade him.
Yeah.
Like I don't think there was any question that there was going to be a deal made this offseason, but now it's like, so what do we do now? Like, how do we craft our identity now?
And I'm not even sure because, like, ideally, I don't think they were building I don't think Don Sweeney and Cam Neely get up out of bed and are like, how do we build the next great 50-win team? Like, they're trying to build a Stanley Cup champion, right? So it's like, it's not, I don't know. I don't know. Like, that's a difficult, thing to kind of figure out, because if you take that chance, there's no guarantee it works out, and all of a sudden it could backfire you. And that's where, again, the boldness comes into play. But I think a lot of it too, and this speaks to a lot of those moves that they made, is like, you have to hit those out of the park then too. Like, the margin for error becomes a little slimmer when you start building your club a certain way.
Yep. And also too, like, you did have the benefit in these, these various iterations of the Bruins over the past 2 decades, really. Like, there was a lot of continuity on those teams, and you were kind of filling in some cracks around them. Whereas now it's like you're nearing a point where you're going, like I said, the identity is completely going to be overhauled here at some point. Like, I mean, you got Pastrnak and Marchand and McAvoy, so like you do have a strong foundation in place. But I think the moves that you're going to be seeing in the upcoming off seasons are a little bigger than maybe you used to in the past.
That would be interesting.
Yeah,
it's hard to totally, because like I don't think you look at your. This is the thing. I don't think you look at your roster and be like, we need to get bold for bold's sake, and who wants David Pastrnak?
But I think you gotta bring in, like, so what would constitute a successful offseason for the Bruins? Like, I think you gotta bring in like a top 6 center. Like, I think, like, somebody, a top 6 forward.
There's a ton of Elias Lindholm buzz.
A move like that, right? I don't like. Is he a guy? I don't know. Like,
yeah. I look at, so I was kind of digging through stuff. I like the idea of a guy like Chandler Stevenson, who is out in Vegas and he's put together a couple pretty good seasons the last couple of years. I think he's projected to make $5 or $6 million, maybe a little cheaper than Lindholm. And like, now you're looking at Coyle, Zaka, Stevenson. Is it like, are 3 second-line centers better than 1 first-line center and then whatever behind that? I also, then maybe you save some money and go get a guy like Tyler Toffoli. But like, the question is too is, excuse me, what's the future for Jake DeBrusk? So there's moving parts even within there. Yep. So I think a perfect offseason would be finding a way to re-sign DeBrusk and also bringing in 2 more top 6 guys.
Yeah.
Easier said than done.
I was gonna say. I mean, they do have the benefit of a decent amount of cap space. Like, what is it, like $21 million? I think they have to play with. But still, like that, it goes quick, especially when you have to pay the goaltender.
Yeah, and I'm thinking,
and that's priority number 1 at this point.
It's probably like $8 million a year for Swayman. Feels like what everybody kind of is selling on. That's the 6th highest paid goalie. But there goes
the other sort of layer of the Ullmark trade, where if you were gonna poke holes in it, being the lack of cap relief that they got from that. Like, I think, like, clearly you accepted the reality that we're not gonna get maybe as much cap relief as we want here, but we're getting the 1st round pick.
You're buying a 1st round pick, basically.
Yeah, which also, but like, they had 0 leverage really in that whole thing.
Yeah,
like, it's. You had to trade him. Everybody knew you had to trade him. You had the 15-team no trade list. So like, the options were limited, and it was clear that he was willing to exercise those rights. And so like, at some point, you just had to kind of choose the best deal available.
And then
I don't think they did terrible in that regard.
I agree, and I think it's like the inclination, which is understandable, to just be like, horrible return. With like 3 minutes after the deal is announced, it's always kind of like, well, maybe there's something else coming here.
Yeah.
I know Korpisalo's not endeared in these parts yet, but I think there was a lot of that similar conversation about when they signed Ullmark.
Sure.
So there is that. What was else I was gonna say? Oh, and then kind of that point about like they didn't have a ton of leverage. Like the Markstrom trade to Jersey was another one where it's like, that happened a week ago. Now all of a sudden you're running out of chairs.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like no different than like a quarterback carousel over the offseason, where it's like it's like those two were just kind of staring at each other.
Which, like,
for
maybe if
the better part of a week.
Yeah, maybe if that's the second guess you want to look at is like, could you have done this earlier and got out in front of that? I'm not sure. I don't know. So.
Just for a little bit of context, like how where the Bruins are at, like as it relates to Stanley Cup contenders. So on the betting board, I believe they're, let's see, I want to say 14th They're at 23 to 1
23 to
right
1
now.
is yeah.
Sandwiched between the Winnipeg Jets at 21 to 1, and the Nashville Predators at 31 to 1. So they're kind of in that like
Top third.
Yeah, they're in that second tier though, beneath the likes of like Florida and Carolina, Colorado, like those types of teams where you can almost bank on the fact that they'll be there next year. So they could, I don't know, maybe good value.